Well guys, it took 10 years, but it finally happened. Now if you were in hypersleep, for instance, it may not have been that bad for you. However, it's been a whole decade since Alien Isolation released, to what apparently not the greatest of success, but a slow trickle and a huge word of mouth over the years has led to one of the greatest resurgences, in my opinion, of, if not survival horror, of all time. My feed here, there, and everywhere has been filled with love for the first game, excitement for the sequel, and just general Alien positivity. Even the digital release for Alien Romulus is coming out soon, so that'll be really cool. But today, we're not actually talking about this. This isn't the news video that I'm making. This is actually a quick little add-on to the front of a very important video I've been working on for quite some time. To many, Alien has been a pretty mixed franchise, with the movies unable to make up their mind on whether it's a horror thriller series or a camp action one, and quite frankly, the fans are just as equally divided. The best examples of either lie in the first two entries. From the phenomenal first movie from 1979 that delivered a chilling experience with a wonderful use of sound and darkness, to Aliens, the bombastic sequel that ups the visuals, the cast, the charisma, and, well, the number of aliens. It's from these two that almost all games in the franchise tend to make a choice between. Games like Aliens, Fireteam Elite, or Colonial Marines set themselves clearly in line with the action category. While for this video, we're going to cozy up and talk about Alien Isolation, the game that defied all odds to not only be one of the best experiences that you can have with Alien, but one of the best that you can have in gaming altogether. Now, obviously I've missed the 10-year anniversary, but thankfully we had some good things to talk about there at the beginning of the video. Either way though, hopefully sometime throughout this nice October spooky month, you'll be able to sit down and listen to me kind of break down the plot of the game, as well as talk about the gameplay, and just a bit about how it's aged overall, and it's more of a long-form critique. Don't get me wrong, I could make a 10-minute video kind of summing up all of this perfectly, but this is something I want you to sit down and, experience with me, as this is my entire gameplay. Over 300 gigabytes of footage was used for this video, so I hope you like my voice because there's going to be quite a lot to talk about, and it's going to be a pretty good time. I'm going to throw in some, jokes here and there, maybe, and if you don't like them, well, sue me. Please don't, I'm broke. But before I go through my time with the game, I want to set the stage for when exactly this game came out and how important it was in many ways. So flashback to the early 2010s. People are still riding off the high of the Dead Space series from 2008 and its sequel in 2010. However, Resident Evil 6 marked a major fall from grace and a heavy blow against high-budget horror games in 2012, only to be followed up with Dead Space 3 in 2013, which got a lot of hate for moving more over to the action over horror, which is very fitting for this video. With AAA horror gaming seemingly in a dire state by then, 2013 had an ace up its sleeve: Aliens Colonial Marines. A game in development for 6 years, and so far apart from what was promised that there's actually rumors that Gearbox took some of that Aliens money from Sega and put it into Borderlands 2. So, with both high-budget horror and alien gaming down for the count as we enter 2024, it's looking like game over, man. I'm sorry, that was a little much. Then, trailers come out for Alien Isolation from Creative Assembly and The Evil Within from Tango Gameworks. I'm not ashamed to say that I picked The Evil Within because I much preferred third person at the time, and quite frankly, I still feel like that game never got the love it deserved. I'm glad Tango is kinda saved, kinda. But don't worry, I wasn't much behind on playing Alien either. I started back with this is tough to imagine now, a rental for my Xbox 360. I didn't finish Alien Isolation though until 2015 when I got my first proper PC, and man, I'm really glad that I went back and I did. Now, all of these years later, I can finally put my own hat in the ring and talk about my feelings about this phenomenal game. I want to properly answer if Alien Isolation was deserving of my endless praise, or was it just the nostalgia and bias towards a franchise that I like. So sit down, get some cornbread, and get cozy. There's plenty of game to talk about and even more to talk about after that. So without further ado, let's get right in. Being developed by Creative Assembly and published by Sega, Alien Isolation came out as a cross-generation game for the Xbox 360, PS3, as well as the PS4 and Xbox One generations in 2014. And man oh man, Alien Isolation starts off immediately by showing its age as a 360 era game, with pre-rendered cutscenes that don't hold up for shit in my opinion. Though I gotta say, choppy frame rates and less than ideal lip sync still do little to take away from the amazing vocal performances here as we meet Amanda Ripley, the daughter of the main series protagonist. As she speaks with Samuels, it's not so subtly brought up that Amanda is still searching for her mother after the Nostromo's disappearance, and I guess maybe destruction, they don't really know. But our boy Samuels knows exactly how to give a lady what she wants. A spot on the crew to extract the black box wreckage of the vessel that her mother was working on when it disappeared. And that's that. A fade to black later, and we wake up in first person, alone, in one of the hypersleep pods, very reminiscent of the first movie's opening as well. It's then that you're finally given real-time graphics and you realize that you weren't crazy for remembering that this game looks really good. Sure, there could have been higher resolution textures here or there, but overall the opening features a high attention to detail, with proper clutter and plenty of retro-futuristic looking technology. Unfortunately for 15-year-old me in 2015, we have to get dressed. Then we make our way through the ship we're on, the Torrens, and find both Samuels again, as well as a company legal agent for the mission, Taylor. We don't really get much out of these characters just yet, but through little dialogue you can tell that Taylor is clearly way out of her element here, and she should really only be behind the desk. My favorite touch in all of the opening scene is how similar to the Nostromo the Torrens actually is. They're very similar freight crafts, and whether it's the medbay or the iconic Last Supper table, where you see that first chestburster scene, there's a clear attention to detail here that's indicative of the larger game experience as well. But anyways, a quick debrief by the ship's captain Verlaine primes us up to board the Sevastopol station, which the best way I can explain the kind of station it is it's kind of like a colony vessel where families live and businesses run in stalls. We learn this a little bit later, but for the sake of introductions, this place was built by Seegson. Their primary corner of the market was in the tech race with their synthetic working Joes, which they would manufacture and sell to other places. Of course, none of this was on our postcard. This is just where another ship, the Anesidora, took the Nostromo's black box when they found it. Now, as we approach the station, Orlando Bloom here sees some dishes that need done and begins speeding up. Everyone else sees the clear damage and attempts to contact the station, but they go unanswered. The only option is to spacewalk as the three amigos to Sevastopol. To interject some opinion here, I think this cutscene was actually really good, especially compared to that first one. The beauty of space, shot compositions, sound design, and disorienting camera cuts really do well to lock you into the imminent action. But we're on the station now, and we're alone and cut off. So naturally, the first thing I want to do is remove as much clothing as possible. As we continue, we find a registration point, or for the sake of gameplay, a save station. One of the more iconic aspects of the game that even made a cameo in Alien Romulus. Continuing through the machine-laden hallways, it's clear the station has sustained heavy damage. Smoke pours out of any crevice while lights flicker on and off, but what really sells the ship's decay is Ripley coughing as she adjusts to the air quality. After a quick detour through a vent, we find ourselves Ace Ventura style continuing on our path. Oh, and here's another terminal. There was one earlier on the Torrens, but it was kind of a rehash of the info that we already covered, so I kind of skipped over it. But let's talk about these here. The computers within the game are scattered all around the world, and that's how you find some notes, audio logs, and even some utility uses like unlocking doors or completing your objective. It's got that signature alien green, and due to the low-tech look, they can't help but remind me of the terminals from Fallout as well. Regardless though, all this note really keys us into is that Sevastopol was in the process of being decommissioned, and that only a skeleton crew of what was originally there remained. Immediately after, Ripley fails the easiest game of The Floor is Lava that I've ever seen, and once again, I have to point out that the first-person camera was absolutely the right call for this game. The animations here are so good, and it really keeps you disoriented just as Ripley would actually be. And I promise we'll pick up the pace. I won't talk about every little detail as this video goes on. But this is a critique, so I want to lay the groundwork for everything, no matter how long-winded. Ripley shows the most personality when she's talking to herself and actually reacting to her own situations. While as we progress further into the game, there's good exchanges here and there. They tend to be, Ripley, go do this. And she's like, yeah, sure, okay. But here is what I think I will miss the most as this game goes on. It's kind of the opposite of Aloy, where I want Ripley to talk, because it really does a lot to show more depth to her as a character. Now, we're down here in some kind of luggage area, and while we're looking for a way out, we do see some Biden campaign signs. In the next room, we're treated to what looks like a nice public area. However, it's got that same grim lack of appeal so far. There's some glowing terminals up against the wall that are to update your map, and I do so. And for each area, they reveal the room layouts, and within those, they also reveal many things. Points of interest, collectibles, save stations, and other important things that we'll get into later. But after powering on the area, we get our first tease of the game's title character, with just a far-off hiss. Obviously, we're still essentially in the game's tutorial, but I love that in a little way it feels like the xenomorph could come over any time. We're just lucky enough that it doesn't do so yet. Anyway, now that we've got the power booted up, the next Fallout terminal is on. We get a code to a nearby door that's full of somebody's survival stash. Also, we get an official note for the decommission from Seegson this time that really just serves to introduce the station's central artificial intelligence, Midjourney. No, but actually Apollo is a sweet name. And we finally get the payoff that the Working Joes are not actually outdated presidential candidates, but rather outdated androids. Turning on power flow lets some people run through, but they don't stay to chat. Which is fine though, because I take the time to look at some of these new lit up posters, and they seem pretty cool. Great world building. In that stash I mentioned, I found our first blueprint for the medkit. Blueprints work exactly as you'd think. You have crafting components that you put towards the design, and then you make them. It's just that easy. Well, unless you're trying to make something on the fly, because crafting doesn't slow or stop downtime at all, so you have to be really careful when you're doing this. Moving through the next area, we get into a more market-styled area. Wide windows show off the gas giant outside, and most doors and shutters are inaccessible. Once again, the goal is to restart the generator to get through. Might I say the music that plays here is subtle, but just as chilling. Truly masterful at that sense of foreboding, as we haven't really had any major scary payoffs yet, if you would. We're in an arcade, and while this was a missed opportunity to have a Sonic case, since it was a Sega game, what truly bummed me out is that there was no Dig Dug representation here, so I immediately left. Our way forward is through a restaurant. The terminal here features a sad note where the employer is telling the employee they aren't needed anymore because the shop's closing, and rumor has it so is the station. That wasn't the only indicator of the pre-shit show state of the station in the room, however. An audio log from a reporter, Julia Jones, describes the events of a riot where a Marshal Waits was being dodgy about the reasons for the lockdown, which agitated the crowd, and things seemed to escalate from there to the point of gunshots. Now, headed into the next area, which is the baggage claims, we get our first attempt at a scare, which also just means that the lights changed a little and loud noises accompanied them. But upon further investigation, it's clear that the Grim Reaper never came because there's body bags everywhere. Which in and of itself should be a huge red flag for Ripley, because up until this point, it's clear there was some kind of mutiny or something going on, but to what extent that something has happened here, we just don't know. The way forward has some kind of mechanism that manually locks it. So after some looking around in the offices, I find a sick hot dog poster, and hey, also this meat tenderizer called the Maintenance Jack. This guy got himself locked up in the evidence locker because he was wrecking stuff with it while drunk. Now, with our new tool, a lot of rooms we passed earlier are now accessible. The first room features an audio log where that same Marshal Waits is questioning a guy named Heist about his boss, though Heist doesn't seem to be too chatty. And already as a huge fan of Metroid, it's really interesting to me that Metroid took that story note idea of a female protagonist from the original Alien movie, whereas now an Alien game is actually using what they call a Metroidvania-styled mechanic of getting tools that allow you to loop back and actually continue forward or find collectibles. In that way, that's just a really cool full circle moment for me that I really enjoyed. And it really takes appreciating the past and the history of both franchises to really truly understand that, or at least think about it. Now, going back to the main door throws us into, once again, another cutscene. This one's also really good. Our first intro to a survivor named Axel, who would definitely miss most of his shots if he was actually aiming here. Regardless, his anxious nature and almost hushed but clearly heightened tone shows the fear of being found by what he calls a killer. Amanda and Axel find some common ground on wanting to get off of the ship. They settle to find comms together, and now we're a band of two. On our way, we find a couple in the act of repairing an elevator, of course. It starts to seem like it could be a little tense. Axel aiming his gun, this time a little bit better, while revealing that we're actually the Beatles. But ultimately, there's an uneasy friendliness in a don't mess with me and I won't mess with you kind of way. And as we get into it, that's the design philosophy of some of the human interactions in the game that, to me, is the best display of the word isolation. Not one where there's no one around, but one where there are other potential allies against a greater threat, but no one trusts one another well enough to work together. Headed down the elevator, Ripley comes to her senses and finally pushes the subject of the killer to Axel. Finally, he says more definitively that it's a monster, but mind you, this was right after he said that they could kick back and braid each other's hair, so he's not really making too much sense. There's some armed guys down at the bottom of the elevator, who Axel warns are more of the shoot-first type of guys, but he knows a place. His makeshift hidey hole reminds me a lot of Newt's from Aliens. We even get some essential horror gaming gear here, the flashlight. Batteries not included, you gotta find them everywhere. Emerging from the vents, we get our first stealth sequence, with the full group of armed guys this time. They're all on edge because someone, probably Axel, is inside their lockdown area and stealing their supplies. So it was easy to sneak past, turn off the generator, and slide into a vent. They went and checked it out, and we left. This is a great, on rails, mind you, version of how stealth can work within the game. Now, welcome to the first episode of Bug Hunt, the show where we pinpoint the nearest and dearest bugs and glitches. Today we look at Axel not fucking moving. The next room's terminal doesn't reveal too much, but that restaurant employee from earlier, Zoe, is mentioned as one of the people in this group that we're dealing with now, which is nothing more than just a cool little callback that doesn't really matter, it's just, a little perspective. Unfortunately, the group does catch up, and this guy thinks that he can touch my Pookie Bear. Well, he's gonna get double-teamed. Running has us hitting the next cutscene of the game, one that fans of the original movie may feel is all too familiar. Chains hang from the ceiling, and there's water dripping everywhere as Axel reins in Ripley and her perception of killing humans. That conversation, and our dear friend's life, are cut short. Now, that hiss we heard earlier that I said was nothing but nice little foreshadowing is constant, it's persistent. Calling the transit only builds the tension as the music ups its tempo, all indicating that the xenomorph is here. But alas, we make it with no problem. Arriving in the Lorenz Systech Spire finds us getting shot at. She misses and goes for some friends, so I took her access tuner, which is basically a hacker tool that needs to be fixed. Currently it doesn't work. And we're back with another episode of Bug Hunt. Today we're looking at whatever the hell this is. Circumventing this vent can only be done by moving backwards. I'm really not sure what's up with this one. I've never had this issue with any other vents throughout this playthrough, but it happens here almost consistently. Now that chick from earlier comes back with her 3 guy friends. And while my first thought was, man, I'd really hate to be her boyfriend, my second thought was, hang on, I've got a game to play here. I won't lie, my first attempt at this was actually to murder these people. You can see here how I made a plan, saw that circumstances changed, doubled down, and I still paid the price for it. The next time I tried stealth. This went way better. I threw some flares to draw attention, and then there was only really one to get past. He just took some good old-fashioned patience, something that a lot of stealth games really do require from their players. And Alien Isolation is no different in that regard. Sometimes you'll do a lot of waiting if A, you run out of resources or materials to craft different gadgets, or just quite frankly, everybody likes to be a little too close to Ripley when she's hiding. Headed downstairs, we're now in tech support. The game gives me a revolver and almost immediately humbles me with this vent. Speaking of sound effects within the game though, this is really one of those moments that, you realize that 90% of the stuff you're looking at throughout the course of this game is just really messed up stuff. And I really feel that those small quips and reactions from Ripley would add so much to this experience. Especially in, let's say, dynamic scenarios such as open combat, where she could yell triumphantly or even react to other humans in a way that's like, hey, I don't want to hurt you. It would add so much depth to Ripley's character, especially reacting to the countless gore all around this place. I just think the game could have leveraged Ripley as a character better in these type of reactions. Back to the game though, I did find a blueprint for the smoke bomb in the next room, which is really nice. It's one of my favorite items in the game. It does exactly what it says. It obscures both your and any potential enemy's vision in the effect. But anyways, what we've been after this whole time. The flight recorder that could tell us exactly what happened to our missing mother, and it's been corrupted. And I gotta say, that's truly devastating. And the voice acting here does so much to sell Amanda as a real character, a term I'm gonna start using a lot more for this playthrough because I'm trying to make a point here. Because from here on, throughout the rest of the game, Amanda as a character gets more and more dicey. But so is our situation as we enter a lockdown. But now we have a working security tuner as well. So we're actually able to boot up the hacking minigame, which just basically is selecting the right icons in the right order before the time on the screen runs out, and you get a couple attempts at it as well. This is one of a few different type of minigames that you can actually do throughout the course of the game, and it's easily the most common. It's not complex, but that's really good because you'll need to use it in a lot of high stress, stealthy situations where you need to be moving quickly. You don't want to have to learn 1,000 different intricate minigames. Now, with our working tuner and a can-do attitude, I doubled back and found a recording in a nearby room from tech support stating that those flight recorders were built to last. So, either somebody from the Nostromo wiped the drive, or it was corrupted on the way to Sevastopol. To me, the plot thickens. Now, to bypass the area lockdown that we're in, we need to take a detour, and look, hey, it's the new guy. The music is perfect, overbearing, high pace, and fades out as the xenomorph leaves our immediate vicinity. Now, it's semi-common knowledge at this point that Alien Isolation was at least considered to be a third-person game at one point. And off the bat, this introduction perfectly shows why that was the wrong call, and switching to first-person was, in fact, the far more immersive experience. I mean, the lack of information when behind the desk about where the xenomorph even is and where it's facing is like half of the fear factor.
Say that again?
Now the same goes for the actual lean mechanic within the game itself. It's actually pretty comprehensive, being able to lean to both sides, plus forward even, to look over the cover, and even kind of diagonally. You just have to keep in mind that you're gonna get spotted even behind cover if the enemy placement is right, so you need to always be careful and quite fearful of where an enemy is placed. So anyways, we're back out into the main lobby where that cuck show was earlier, and come to find out that the angry boyfriend was actually the xenomorph the whole time. Gunshots are only met by shrill screams from the alien, and to play it safe, I used this terminal to reflow the power to turn off air purification, making it much harder for anyone in the room to see, including myself. Thankfully though, the xenomorph had no idea I was truly there, and once everyone that was shooting at him was dead, he left. So I'm easily able to get back through and make it into Seeks and Communications. Here we finally meet a working Joe, who isn't truly working at all. I can see Galaga on his terminal.
I do not understand.
I do. I understood that reference.
The next Joe says that comms are restricted by way of Apollo. However, we really need to get that up and running because we need to be able to contact both the Taurans as well as our people on the station. In a small but very important room at the end of the hallway, we've got the iconic motion tracker popularized in its current form by the sequel movie Aliens. They immediately pull a gag on the player by showing a fast approach from behind, just for it to be a friendly synthetic. A good scare for your first time, as your brain is really trying to learn the new gameplay mechanic it's showing you. And while I'm much more of a fan of the non-scripted, horror of this game, this was genuinely one of the great introductions into the fear of Alien Isolation. In a wider net, there's something to be said about the game's ability or inability to tell the player when the NPC is going to be hostile. Sometimes I expect androids to be hunting me, and then they just don't care about me being there at all. Other times I'm trying to stealth past people, and they also don't really give a damn that they're like, what's that girl doing on the floor over there? I see you. Now, I will say, generally the game makes a point, like, hey, there's some haywire androids in the area, or the androids will say something like, you're not supposed to be here. But it's not always super consistent, especially with the people sometimes, if they're going to be friendly, or, well, not so much. However, this is good. I actually love the fact that the game was keeping me on my toes at all times. Headed upstairs, I found another blueprint to make noisemakers, which, much like the smoke bomb, does exactly what it sounds like. It makes noise. For the sake of talking about it, one of these doors actually does feature another minigame that you can see on the access tuner, and it basically just features a timing-based 3-pin lock, and these are generally my favorites, especially in high-stress scenarios. And if you're quick, you can really get it done on the first try. Now, in the vents, we actually get the first true showcasing of how deadly the Working Joes can be. And very much on my point from earlier, it shows that these in the area will in fact be hostile. Leaving the vents, I have to dodge a camera that will alert those nearby synthetics. However, cameras can be turned off with those same rewire stations that I mentioned earlier with the air purity. Doing some quick exploring, a terminal shows a note from a guy named Ransom, somebody we'll be talking about a lot throughout the course of this video, who is looking for someone to cover his ass on some sketchy documentation where he's ripped off the station during its decommission. He's one of the higher-up guys. Anyways, taking the elevator to comms control has us able to overhear a message from Verlaine on the Torrens. Basically, they have no idea what's going on, and the explosion forced them out of range of Sevastopol. And unfortunately, the computer that we wanted to use has way too many viruses on it, so we have to go deeper into comms to find a second terminal. A nearby audio log sheds light on the blurry message from the beginning of the game. When Verlaine initially requested access to the station, Marshal Waits actually did reply properly that the Torrens should stay back and call for long-range help. One of those moments where it's like, hey, it's so close yet so far, he sent the message, we couldn't hear him properly, and you have to think back on the wasted potential of how much better everything could have went if we were actually able to get help. And that to me is always one of the strongest moments of emotion in horror, like the what could have been, the happy scenario. Now, moving closer to that second terminal, there's a few Joes patrolling, but nothing I didn't avoid with just using my scanner and seeing where they were. I found another blueprint for an EMP grenade here, which will temporarily disable the synthetics, but more on that later. Now, after some of my least favorite minigames, these are usually more for objectives rather than just random doors. We basically just have to match our input with what's on the screen. And it's really not engaging, it's not fun, and this would have been one that I would have removed. You can tell it was here just for variety's sake. But we do get a new cutscene. And hey, look, it's our buddies Samuel and Taylor. But Taylor is hurt, and wouldn't you know, they're already by medical. Honestly, what bothers me most here is that if we're really trying to be sneaky through all this, there's apparently synthetics nearby. Why is Ripley yelling? Anyways, somebody called Chris Hansen because that was an unauthorized communication, so I gotta run, or rather sneak around through some vents. On the way out, I did find a flashbang blueprint, which does fall into question. I've now found like 3 different tools that I haven't even been forced to use or really had a chance to use properly even once. I get that I could have, went out of my way to try to use them, but with the sake of the stealth that I was very easily able to do, I felt no need to. But I really think that spacing out sections where I needed to use each tool after being able to craft them, it would have helped lengthen out the sense of finding new things within the gameplay. And even turn each of those gameplay sections into pseudo-tutorials, which would have been perfectly fine. You got to see just how each of those items work, but maybe that's just me. Because I also know that being forced to do any type of gameplay style is also very restrictive. And while I'm not the completionist at all, I haven't ever misallocated charity funds, I did start the game, however, with 45 out of 50 of the achievements when I started this playthrough, one of which was to complete this section without ever being attacked. It was a nice challenge, and I did get it. It puts in perspective how challenging the whole game could be if you're trying to stealth the whole time and never actually be attacked by an android human or even the xenomorph, which is essentially what you have to do for one of the achievements I don't have, which is play the whole game without dying. However, that's not what this playthrough is about. Now, of course, I did have to put my foot down on the way back and use one of those awesome EMPs, and they make the androids such a pushover you'd even call them Apple. Is that a topical phone joke these days? Do people... Who knows? I have an iPhone. It's fine. Anyways, I made it out, and I've got to say that using the game's central transit system is a breeze for jumping around, especially if you ever miss an item in a certain area for your completion run, but again, that's not what this playthrough is about. I continue on to SciMed, and sure enough, Samuels and Taylor were right there. Taylor is clearly in rough shape and doesn't really seem to be mobile. So being the only able-bodied badass around, we're going to medical for something to help her. The San Cristobal Medical Facility is a section of the game that would give me nightmares if it weren't for a beautiful opening like this. But there's never really truly peace in this game, as someone's already trying to catcall us on the radio. Watching us through the cameras, this mysterious stranger is guiding us directly to where we need to be. This guy is Dr. Coleman. He's conveniently locked himself up in a room as the guy in the chair. He offers a fair exchange, his help with Taylor, for us finding the codes to the service elevator that he can safely leave the area with his only real hint being to find Morley's office. I figured it best to head there first. Complete side note, but I love the medical posters here. Lice, STDs, and other harmful conditions are all corporatized so much to look a little more than just a pretty picture. Hell, even the solitary confinement rooms have audio messages that are meant to calm, yet have passive-aggressive undertones. And this stuff, along with those posters I mentioned earlier on in some of the public areas, really shows that Seegson Corporation was just how you'd imagine Weyland-Yutani would be as well. They're very much not out for people, they're out for the highest percentage of profit always. Now, as we approach the office, both Coleman's own comments and an audio log suggest that he's a self-righteous and hypocritical addict who used his position of treating unstable patients as a means to feed his own habit, until he was cut off by the other staff. In the office is yet another terminal, and outside of a note discussing low med supply, partially attributed to Coleman's handling of prescriptions, there's also the code that we need. Now, we just need the key card, and in case things weren't tedious enough, we've got red lights in a system saying that the quarantine has been breached. And there he is, the most beautiful design for the xenomorph that I think I've ever seen. Truly the perfect organism, long and sleek, and truly a great upgrade to the original H.R. Giger design, that feels faithful and phallically on brand. I could just look at him all day. Oh, he's gone. You know, it must have been his turn on the Nintendo. And we're going to have to be right back because I kind of forgot that when he's close enough, he will hear you using your motion tracker. And on that note, all I'm going to say is fuck hiding in things in this game, like closets, vents, anything like that, that obscure your vision, as well as not being able to know if he's right there listening to you. It sucks. This area of the game is one of the most tense though. The xenomorph is on high alert by default, and he's very quick. The sound design alone is breathtaking, let alone the layouts of where you actually need to go to be undetected. Once I found a board detailing everywhere Morley might have been, I used a noisemaker to get the alien exactly where I wanted him to be. Using that knowledge, I felt safe enough to move down the single corridor that I needed to go to progress. I wanted to make sure that once I committed down there, he wasn't going to be just walking towards me. It was at that moment that I really realized that this game's economy of tools versus your hazardous environment completely alters how you play in meaningful ways. I knew that there was only one way to progress, and how active the xenomorph was in this section meant that I really needed to be careful because, let's say he starts walking towards me, I can't simply start sprinting to go hide somewhere because he's going to hear that. I say all of that to say, that's fine and dandy until you play like this. Or this. Okay, we found Dr. Morley, so that's a score. Now we just gotta make it back. Psych, I'm gonna play like this again. And I really want to just take a second to appreciate just how awesome this scene really was. The xenomorph chases me. I try to hit the lockdown on the door to insta-lock the door for, I think it's like a couple seconds. It's not too long, but it's long enough for me to find a hiding place. And he manages to get in before the door even shuts, and immediately kills me. Like, how is that not like an immediate like subversion of expectations? I hit the lock, I thought I was safe, he makes it in anyway. I felt like the side character in one of the actual movies. Like, I was like, oh man, I'm one of the first kills, you know? But after trial and error, the game of cat and mouse ends with us making it back to Coleman. Ripley's upset that he set us up, but he clearly knew the creature would show up, but hey, a deal's a deal. We did our end, now it's time for him to do his. Well, I can't say that I'm sad about this, but man, that door opening reveal is truly iconic. R.I.P. Coleman, you were a real one. Now, this section is one I remember having a hard time with, but this time I had absolutely no problem at all. We're still on the hunt for the medical supplies that we need, but now that we're in the morgue, we get a stun baton. A nice cow prod that we'll hold on to just in case. The terminal has a few notes here to Frank from Dr. Lingard. The first note talked about what I believe is Patient Zero, with the first chest burster on board. The second, basically pleading Frank to get out of San Cristobal due to the imposed quarantine, presumably to try to trap the creature. Nothing really to say about this stuff yet, but we'll get into more of that a little bit later. To continue on, we need to flow power to a vent. To get to the rewire, we need to stabilize the temperatures within the morgue rooms. Like I said, I remember this area being kind of a xenomorph spawn killing ground for me personally as I reload my save each time. But this time he never showed up. So I powered up with absolutely no problems at all, and I gotta say, as for the next room, he's here. Reaching the office room here gives us a lot of information. First off, our first real form of defense against the xenomorph, a Molotov blueprint, but also some confirmation that Waits wanted medical closed off to trap the creature. In another nearby terminal, we got one from Morley to Lingard, letting her know that they've got all that's left of the meds and that he's headed upstairs to make sure that there's no straggler patients that still need help getting out. Obviously, we know what happened once he got up there because we already found his bodies. But now knowing that he died looking out for others really does add so much to a character that we never met. And to me, that's truly some touching stuff in my opinion. That's great writing. Also on that terminal is this.
This is Lingard, Senior Medical Officer at Sevastopol Station. I want to state for the record. I have been placed under duress with regards to the compromised Patient Zero. And Ransom, Season's head of operations, he made certain threats for my career and my certification. I want that on record. God, help me. That woman needed help. I didn't know what type of parasite she had encountered, but it had planted something inside her. I am so sorry. I had no way of knowing what would happen.
There's so much to read from this in my opinion. Lingard was there firsthand, and Ransom is, yeah, he's still kind of a piece of shit. Going into the operating theater, the mood drastically shifts. Bodies are everywhere, and once again that shake and that sense that the station is barely being held together. The meds we need just so happen to be next to Foster, aka Patient Zero. The medical records are accompanied by an order left by Marshal Waits, putting him also at odds with Ransom, as Ransom forced himself with his privilege into the incident area. Now the plan was to go out through reception now that we've got the medical supplies. However, we've got to head to the power plant to force an evacuation procedure because it's locked off. This boils down to being trapped in with an android while I'm trying to hack. I like this scenario as a whole, with the added tension of the ever-present xenomorph. But after much stealthing, we make it to the reception. And I can't lie, the first time that I ever experienced this moment, I was thrown for such a loop. There are some pretty drawn out kill cams that this one felt just like one of those. A highly choreographed moment that would eventually lead to a game over screen. However, at the last moment, you're saved by an explosion. Clearly, you can see the explosives behind. There's not much time to get out though, and while I praise Ripley's upper body strength, I can't help but feel for her as she's grabbing these burning hot ladders and pieces of metal to climb. I can't help but feel that her skin is just gone. The effects of the explosion are felt as whole corridors are completely blocked off, leading us to get into some more crowded than usual vents, only to come out to a broken elevator. But we need that elevator to get back to Samuels and Taylor. In this area, we're joined by some murderous dudes who I plan to completely avoid. The hidden path is straightforward, but nonetheless very satisfying to pull off. In a world where the human AI interacted more, they'd shine lights in the vents and patrol more regularly. However, the enemies we actually got are the lowest point in the game for me personally. The human enemies have a generally poor level of, visual detection, they lack both offensive and defensive strategy, and even general balancing leaves human enemies as the weakest link in a pretty great gameplay loop overall. To me, in an ideal world, you might even be able to intimidate or scare human enemies out of the area as a way to try to avoid them. But as I've already mentioned earlier, I think there are better ways that they could try to detect people too. After all, they're expecting some kind of killer creature, so they should be a little more on their toes than standing in the middle of the room with dark corners all around them. But speaking of weakest links, a terminal upstairs provides a little more insight into the head of operations of the androids. While admitting that Weyland-Yutani, or the company, were ahead in the android tech race, this guy is constantly strangling projects of any actual funding, basically leading any development to a standstill. But one thing is clear here, that investors are, or I should say were, needed in order to get the improvements to the working Joes underway, which doesn't sound likely from another audio log nearby either. Okay, so we're finally in the warehouse, but we need an android to get to the supplies. There's actually an access tuner upgrade nearby, and that's actually just what we needed to get in here. And we're here for two reasons. First, there's the location of the item we need to fix the elevator in row 1, stack B, but also just gotta enjoy some killer music while we're playing. Now this room here, I'll point it out, is accessible only with a gas mask, but that's some backtracking that you'll do way later in the game, and unfortunately for this playthrough I didn't do it. But for the sake of getting all the Nostromo logs, this is somewhere you'll want to come back to. Now, letting out that android has us following this pretty boy here. And of course, the room that we need stuff from is pretty fucked up. So I'm just going to start looking everywhere for anything that I can. And yes, of course, we eventually do get the cylinder. Now, this section of the game is what I would consider as just fine. It's actually fairly easy busy work since we snuck past all those guys earlier in a pretty linear fashion. And from some previous experience, I know that the alien can show up in this section. However, he never did. I don't know if it was due to the fact that I didn't cause a commotion before the time, but overall that made this experience much easier. I was walking around, I wasn't stealthing, I didn't need to. So again, this area could have been way more engaging, but because I was just kind of doing what I needed to do, it really wasn't. So in that kind of way, there's an imbalance of the game design to where some tasks feel very boring if you don't have to stealth around, but at the same time it'll become all the more drawn out if you are stealthing. But I get what I need, so now I have to go back through those guys from earlier, and this time I'm feeling a little more bullish. The elevator is just right on the other side of the room. I don't want to have to go all the way up and around just to do what I just did, so I'm going to go right through them. Also, I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss any collectibles within the room, and that was the one place I hadn't checked yet. Another thing to note, due to that hissing that's always kind of constant to let you know that the xenomorph is active nearby, he seems way closer now, but he, as of right now, isn't here yet. And it really does seem that with all the AI that went into the super smart xenomorph, so much so that you always hear the story about how there are almost 2 AIs in the xenomorph, one telling it where to look around, but because it was so efficient, they actually had to have a second intelligence to lie to the initial one that's trying to find the player. Like, that's so smart and such a smart way of dealing with an enemy that is too powerful. It's like in games when you can't deal with the fact that the enemies never miss their shots, especially on like harder difficulties. It's the same thing, only in this time it's you can't deal with it once it finds you, so you just have to let it not find the player as much. And that's how they dealt with it, was having two AIs, one to find you, and the other one to feed it some false information about where to look. And I think that's genius. But as I said, for all of that AI work that went into the Xenomorph, it felt like none of that AIQ was left for the humans themselves. Even looking in my general direction, if I'm in a proper stealth mode, they're not really going to find me unless I'm very, very out of the way. But simple fields of view actually prohibit me from passing without doing something. So for that alone, you might ask me who wants to be a millionaire, because I'm going to phone a friend. Okay, so the elevators are fixed, we went down, and now we're in Monsters, Inc. I swear, I'm not the only one that sees that, right? That's definitely a thing. And once again, I'm feeling pretty bullish. There's some guys at the top, they don't happen to see me, but I'm gonna go up this ladder anyway, honestly because I thought I was sequence breaking a little bit. And yeah, the inability of these characters to notice someone that close to them, there really should have been a proximity alert. Like, these guys were clearly in high alert already, because they just shot at the Xenomorph. The fact that they couldn't hear me climbing a ladder literally right next to them is a little baffling. Like, it's not even like I was behind them. I am going to give a little bit of an olive branch on this and say that this is mild nitpicking, but this is kind of the straw breaking the camel's back in a long line of things that the human AI within this game really did let me down upon retrospect. Where the Xenomorph shines more and more in every scenario that you meet him in, it's the humans that just let you down every time they're on screen. Now, taking the elevator back to the PsyMed is a full loop, and it even unlocks some new doors for us. I can't emphasize enough how satisfying it is to me to slowly open the station back up, one door at a time, and it just feels like there's so much more for you to run around in, even though some of these rooms, once you go in them once, you'll never have to again. But taking the meds back to Taylor finds us in yet another cutscene, with our 2 crew members plus a few more, Marshall Waits being the main one. But Taylor's declining health requires us to get her to Waits' headquarters, where she can be safely treated. The gist is that we have to go and get the transit back up because we screwed up the trap. The gist of the conversation goes that we need to go and get the transit back up and running because we were the ones who screwed up the trap in medical. And honestly, at this point, that's when all I can do is sigh. This is where Ripley begins to turn into the fetch quest queen. We already got a nice taste of it in San Cristobal with Coleman, but as her character motivations have now all but been concluded other than survival, all she can do now is do whatever the guy on the radio, whoever it may be at the time, tells her to do. And I don't mean guy like, hey, it's a guy-girl thing, that's not it. And I can't help but grieve for failure in this middle section of the game in that regard. At least in terms of what it does for Ripley as a character. Yes, I think Ripley's a great character. She's resourceful, she has a lot of things working for her, and even her humility is nice to think about in the beginning of the game when she, stutters at the idea of hurting humans, and just everything about her is very interesting. However, it doesn't come across well when it's like, okay, I'll go do this, okay, I'll go do that. And I know it sounds like I'm nitpicking this game, and truly it's because I am. This is a long-form video where I'm going to truly criticize the things that I thought were shortcomings of it. The whole point of this long video is to go through each of the plot points and determine what works well and what doesn't, in the hopes of looking at the sequel and seeing what is going to improve or, stay the same. Now, I will say, though, the narrative isn't just all bad for Ripley from here on. We'll get to that. I promise we will. And anytime there's something great about it, I'm going to call that out just as much as I've called out the negative. Another thing, on the way to the transit, why can't I pick up the damn axe right here? This thing looks like it would really, if nothing else, fuck up a synthetic. Why can't I just use that? I mean, that would be so much better than a freaking meat grinder. Thankfully, the way to transit control isn't a very long diversion. We're not even truly leaving the area. The transit control being one quick elevator right away is really nice for the sake of pacing, a lot compared to what we just went through as well. Now that we're here, it's immediately noticeable something is trying to escape this locked room. But that's really not a problem, right? Well, activating this terminal doesn't go as planned. A guy walks in and it seems that he's the one who's locked up the android. But in order to get the transit working, the power needs to be rebooted, and well, that opened up the android door. And just like that, it's the battle of the century. And watching this fight between this guy and this android really puts into perspective what exactly is going to happen with Elon Musk's Optimus robots whenever you try to leave them home alone with your children and maybe even just a babysitter. I think that's so funny. And with everything that Elon Musk is trying to do, I think we really need to apologize to David Cage. Detroit Become Human is a great game, and people said, nah, this isn't how it's going to work. You know, you're just doing an allegory for racism. And while that's very true, it became quite literally just real, or it's going to be. So be nice to androids, be nice to David Cage, unless he's an evil guy too, I'm not sure. But finally, that guy does die to the android. He was no match for the machine. And this is when we have to kind of step our little feet in the rings, and I really have to say I appreciate the need when you're fighting something in this game to have to juggle your arsenal, especially in some combat encounters. Thankfully up to this point I've been pretty good about reserving ammo and everything, but if I had limited ammo, these tight spaces could have been really challenging. Being locked in this bigger room with the android would not have been very fun. Well, it would have been fun, you know what I mean. It would have been a daunting task. Checking out that locked room the android came from, we get our next tool upgrade, the plasma torch. Capable of opening many doors and vents that we couldn't before, this is where a lot of the backtracking in the game can really open up, especially if you're looping back through some areas, you want to open up some new vents to kind of sneak around in. It gives you way more options. Also, Post Malone's New Country album is on here too, and that's pretty freaking cool and very forward thinking of Creative Assembly. When opening the vents, the cutter is pretty much on rails, but you can control the speed and the direction. Now, when we're talking about the sequel to Alien Isolation, one thing I would love to see if we still get a kind of cutter tool like this is more intricate, need for cutting certain shapes, or, maybe missing certain wires or something, or even only cutting certain ones. I think that'd be a cool progression of Ripley's mechanic skills as well. And if you're really doubling down on the same kind of tool sets that you had from the first game, that would be a good reason to branch out. Now on the other side, there's also an audio log from Sinclair, a name that's come up a few times in passing up till this point. He's most directly at odds with Marshal Waits, as he is now running a crew of Sikhs and security guys who are ruthlessly stealing other supplies and allowing no one into their sanctuary. And if I'm not mistaken, he's also associated with that group from the very beginning that Axel was at odds with. But speaking of being at odds with the Sinclair guys, back at the transit, some sketchy dudes show up, and while I tried to let them pass, they didn't prove completely blind. Also, this guy fucking no-scoped me at no range at all. Don't worry though, attempt number 2 went much better, and things landed more in my favor. And with that, the way to habitation is opened up. And one thing I wanted to point out, I love the touch that each of the different transit station hubs are a little different. Habitation, a lot more communal place, is a little more homely. It's got plants all around, and it's just meant to feel a little more breathable, livable, and a lot less clinical like the SciMed Tower was. It's just much more welcoming compared to the coldness of the SciMed. Now, the Marshals Bureau has had a lot more of that street art that was prevalent towards the beginning of the game, and knowing what we know now about how secretive they've been about this entire situation and everything leading up to it, I really don't blame anyone for the paranoia or the hatred. As we enter, we see what's been a rare sight so far on Sevastopol: friendly survivors. They really don't have much to say, but they do thank you for opening up the transit system. Waits echoes the same sentiment, even stating that you guys are even now. But that remains to be seen. Taylor is also now stable, but Waits has yet another task for us to follow willy-nilly. He wants us to talk to the guy in there holding, Marlowe, who was the captain aboard the Anesidora when it brought the flight recorder of the Nostromo. What we really need from him is the chain code to bring the Anesidora from its orbit around the gas giant back to the Sevastopol station. Easy enough, right? Well, wrong. What follows is easily one of the weakest sections in the entire game. However, I think watching the introduction is worth it. Amanda and Marlowe each have their own reasons for having this conversation other than solving this problem together. For Ripley, it's learning more about the Nostromo and where they got the black box from. On the other hand, Marlowe needs a way out of confinement, so he actually has a fighting chance at survival. Another cool Easter egg that's super obvious here in this scene where we get close-ups of Marlowe is that Alien Romulus took another design hint from Isolation, and that's poorly animated faces. I don't even feel bad about making that joke about Romulus because resurrecting dead people with CGI is the most on-brand thing that a giant corporation could ever do. It writes itself that the entertainment megacorp buys the rights to the Alien franchise. Now this next section we play as Marlowe in a retelling of their finding of the crashed ship from both Alien and Aliens. This is a scene that feels both bloated and bare at the same time. Obscured visuals outdoors and a slow walk speed aren't helped much by somewhat interesting dialogue. For the gameplay, it's stripped of the main game's strengths. There's no weapons or tools except for a scanner that replaces the motion tracker, but I feel it was mostly only included so people didn't get entirely lost when they couldn't see where they were going. There is some good music here too, and the sound designs are great. The trapped breathing in the suit, muffled footsteps, and constant wind all berate the player's senses, much like the foreign terrain of the planet LV-426. Although I don't think it's technically called that yet, it's not been colonized. The actual spaceship is faithfully recreated with symmetrical, biopunk structuring everywhere. Every bit of machinery looks alive and feels very strange. Even the space jockey is here and looks as cool as ever and very mysterious. It's just so unfortunate that Ridley Scott had to go back with Prometheus and explain exactly what that was. Big mistake in that point, and that's why I'm not really as big of a fan as Prometheus as modern internet is. But really though, if you enjoy this section, a slower pace, and maybe want a little more agency, maybe some puzzles, then a game I can recommend for you without question is Scorn. And this isn't a review of Scorn, this isn't anything more than an offhanded comment, but I think if you enjoy this type of atmosphere, this vibe and overbearing sense, and even some actual enemies in danger, then try Scorn. That's the one you're going to want. But as for this section, all you really do is go and turn off the distress beacon, and then head down the rope into the egg nest, where a final cutscene reveals what exactly led up to that Patient Zero from earlier with Foster. Now, while I thought it was very cool to see these things and environments in the game, and being able to walk around the crashed ship, I do feel genuinely like this was a terrible way to pad out the game and try to space out some of those alien counters that are becoming all the more prevalent. Ultimately, I think they must have known that this section would have bored me because almost immediately after we get out of this, flashback, Ricardo, one of Waite's lackeys, starts saying that the xenomorph is in the Systech Spire, and there seems to already be a plan in place in the area to deal with it, so we need to get the best item in the whole game, the flamethrower. Of course, whenever you enter a room with a clear objective like the flamethrower at the end of the tunnel, it's always nice to loot first. To me, it always feels like I'm a kid who opens a birthday card, and it's clear there's money in there. There's that thing at the end that you know you want, but you need to ignore it in favor of reading the card aloud first, so Grandma can hear you. In this instance, I'm making sure I got all my survival stuff in check, gotta get all my supplies from the room. But before we leave the bureau, I found another audio log from Ransom to Waits, suggesting they trap the creature instead of killing it. Essentially, he's trying to pull the Burke card. And quite frankly, by this point, I'm kind of ready to have a fight with this guy Ransom. I really hope at some point I get to meet him. Another bit of info that I found out, it was revealed that the reason that we had to spacewalk to Sevastopol at the beginning of the game was because Waite's first trap explosion damaged the space flight terminals. I swear, it's incompetence left and right with this guy, and I really mean that. So, when he told me that Ricardo is my point man on the mission, and Samuels is headed to Android processing to lift the lockdown, I was shocked. These are pretty much good plays. Samuels, if I didn't mention it already, is an android. And while Amanda doesn't harbor any of the same hatreds that her mother does for them, it's still smart to use the android to access Apollo. However, it does create a bit of a logic problem later, but we'll get into that when the time comes. And entertaining you while you wait on your transit car is another installment of Bug Hunt. This time you can call Kanye because I found all of the lights, baby. Really? No, they won't go away. Not until the car comes and perfectly fits them. On our way to the Spire, we retrace our steps to the tech support from earlier where we first encountered the xenomorph. Oh, how the turns have tabled. Now we've got the flamethrower, motherfucker. Not that he ever had it, I guess. Now, in the actual stairwell of the Spire, There's a few working Joes who are actually friendly, and that really messed with me so much. I talked about that earlier, but I'm always expecting them to try to come at me and just kind of choke me a little. This game does a great job of giving you trust issues like that. And with the expectation of choking and trust issues, I've now officially made a reference to all my girlfriends. Trust issues aren't uncommon here though, evidenced by the floor mattresses, trash everywhere, and even personal effects like guitars. There was a group here that sealed a spire to keep themselves out of harm's way. However, stir craziness and distrust led to some notes left feeling more like admission to mutiny over anything else. And talking to yourself can also kind of be a sign of mental instability. So maybe Waits should have checked himself out, because he left 2 messages for Sinclair. The first asking for total cooperation and a truce in order to solve the greater problem in exchange for forgetting his past crimes. The second letter basically says, I hope the alien finds you first. So you have to imagine both of these messages were left unread, but regardless, I guess it's kind of cool that Waits tried to get everyone to work together. I was so busy laughing in my head about this though that our old friend actually got the jump on me. Pleased to report though that the flamethrower works pretty well, and while he did flee, he's clearly agitated and now on high alert. Still though, we must use the maintenance jack to enact the lockdown fully. And this next section of gameplay was some of the absolute best. Great stealth sections with both the alien and androids, but also exploration that just hits the perfect sweet spot. Let me show you what I mean. Now with the lockdown initiated in this section, the only way out is with Ricardo through the server farm. But before we get to that, there's something else that we need to find, and this is what I'm talking about. I've got a locked door, a room full of gas, and a rewire terminal. Naturally, I clear the gas out, went across and opened the route up from the other side, and returned to replace the air purification with door access. A pretty smart situational puzzle that does the job of grounding the player as Ripley in this very manual and tactile world. Our reward outside of some crafting supplies is a keycard. More on that in a little bit because we can't get back to where it is just yet. Now, the server farm is a visually pretty cool place. It's got some low fog or smoke or whatever that vaguely covers the bodies on the floor, and the cases provide easy ways to sneak around. Some of them are turned over, probably from the station shaking all the time, but either way you can sneak under a lot of them and they provide pretty easy cover. Interesting to note though that this is the first time since we've been playing that we've had the xenomorph and the androids together in one room. You technically could have had this happen a little bit earlier, but not by much, so we'll just talk about it now. The xenomorph couldn't care less about the androids because they aren't a potential living host that the embryo can be placed within. And in my head, the reason that Bishop got attacked at the end of Aliens and these ones don't get attacked here is these ones don't even look close enough to human, in my opinion, to pass to the xenomorph as something that he should double check. Or perhaps he's already destroyed one before, I'm not really sure. The androids, on the other hand, do make interesting notes that kind of clue us into a little bit of the plot from later in the game. They make lines about making reports about its whereabouts, and trying to figure out exactly what it is. Now, hacking gets us in, and goddammit there's another gas mask room that I definitely should have went back for. But locking down the server hub has Ricardo stumbling more than a 15-year-old me with a pretty girl. Our exit is also closed, and we're trapped in the server farm with the alien. Which actually turns out not to be that big of a deal because we can just kind of hide, and we got back out. Cool. Until Ricardo admits that to let us out, he had to undo the lockdown for the entirety of the Systech Spire. And for a stranger to do that for us in such a dire situation, that is really something. I mean, truly. Think about all the lives he could have potentially been saving, everyone at least in the Marshal's Bureau, by getting rid of this xenomorph. All for one stranger he's only just met. Anyways, with the lockdown lifted, we're able to go back through, and upstairs I took that keycard from earlier and got in a room. It was a super underwhelming reward, all things considered, for me using like 100% of my brain power to actually remember to use the keycard. But I gotta say, man, that loop was really good. I just wish there was something at the end of all this process that was a little more worthwhile. Maybe an ID badge or even a Nostromo log, something like that. Some kind of collectible or even a more worthwhile reward as far as crafting ingredients. But now is attempt number 7,000 to trap this damn thing. This time in the Gemini Labs. There's people in the main area again that you might be familiar with, as if people didn't learn their lesson that this is basically like the killing floor. Anyways, I sneak past them with no problems. I didn't even phone a friend this time. Gemini Exoplanet Solutions is a beautiful location. The lab equipment is foreign to what we've seen so far, and getting to the end of the area, we get a plasma torch upgrade. Also, we can use the rewire to turn off the security camera and get to work on this door. In the room, there's a terminal, and on this terminal is one of the cooler gameplay mechanics for me, and it's more of the underutilized promise of higher skilled gameplay. There's an android in the adjoining room, and I can actually call him to this terminal for a servicing, which will allow me to sneak past, and generally speaking, the ability to manipulate androids on a greater level over just throwing a noisemaker is great. Hell, let me start battle bots by finding one detached from Apollo and setting him against all of the other androids in the area so I can sneak by. Even that would be really cool, but also asking a lot. Also, I haven't really appreciated it before, but the Working Joes can be really creepy in their own right too. Those cold, white glowing eyes in the dark are really nothing to scoff at, especially when those androids will still hit you like a fucking truck. Anyways, I turn on the distribution systems without ever being detected. It's funny, I'm doing so much better in this playthrough because last time, I remember getting caught in what felt like a whole gang of androids showing up here. It's crazy how the challenge of stealth can completely change your encounters. If you go in guns blazing or a little more willy-nilly, you're going to have a harder combat experience. But if you stealth around, you'll have to deal with the xenomorph less, and enemies less in general. But now we've got to reset the breakers, and our good friend Gino the Xeno is back. One breaker, according to our map, is upstairs. So I go ahead and head up the ladder, and there's a terminal that, funny enough, has a note between two smugglers who criticize Waits for checking cargo and not stopping real crime. Mind you, this was along with a note announcing the shutdown of Gemini. Seekson says Sevastopol is 100% safe from shutdown, and that all items must be returned or the marshals will be notified. I've never personally had a job that shut down before or layoffs or anything like that, but I'll be honest with you, if I did, I'd probably be stealing some stuff too. That would definitely radicalize me. Now, the other of the two breakers is back, kind of where we came from in the beginning of the area. And I had one of the most organic gameplay moments of fear that I've ever had playing this game or any game. With the general power on, there's now a security camera in the hallway that we initially came from. At the same time, the alien is now in the room with me, actively looking for me. The camera oscillates and kind of rotates towards the door that we need to go through to get into the hallway and out of this room. Now, in my head, I'm still thinking, hey, there's a gang of androids ready to show up at a moment's notice, so I really shouldn't be detected right now. So as I wait for this camera to actually start moving back, I'm listening and also watching as the shadows of the creature in front of the window bounce off of the lab equipment, all while distorted by the fog of the area. It's genuinely great, and while it wasn't a, hey, the creature's running right at me, it was definitely a moment of fear that I didn't want greater consequences to happen, and set me all the way back to a save station. And to me, that is the greatest reward in this game. If you don't want to get sent back, you're gonna have to be really, really careful and kind of think on your toes a lot of the time. With the other breaker down, we now have to backtrack again back to initialize the distribution of power now that everything's on. And again, if we didn't have to deal with power so much in this damn game, I would have loved it way more. I mean, I really do. I love the manual technology within this universe and this world, but man, why do we have to backtrack so damn much for just turning on a light switch? Now, once there, I have a house android perform a service maintenance to help me turn on the machine. Now, I can use the elevator to Project KG-348, which is named after the gas giant that Sevastopol orbits. It was a project to exploit the planet's natural resource of a rare mix of metallic gases in its cloud layers. That, in and of itself, actually seems fine to me. What gets me is the Gemini Exoplanet Solutions manifesto that I found after some, light backtracking to find anything that I might have missed. They use buzzwords like be bold and adapt, blah blah, grow by adapting to meet new challenges, blah blah, but then it says they will take Mother Nature's blueprint as a starting point and find new applications for existing technology, like fuel resources as building materials, weapon developments for agriculture, and space exploration applied to surgical procedures. What the fuck are you even talking about? I mean, really, This note of all in the whole game strikes me as these people are completely incontinent. Well, I mean incompetent, but I'm sure by the end they were also probably pretty incontinent too. Now, on the way I did have some Xeno trouble, but nothing a flamethrower couldn't solve. The next room is covered in smoke, but for once I felt like I was the one being obscured. I couldn't see anything, and honestly over the alarms I couldn't hear much but the pitter-patter of the alien's feet, just enough to tell me that I'm not alone in this room. The sound design in this game is incredible. Like in this situation, I'm essentially legally blind, and I could still find my way to sneak past the creature. That's just great game design, or at least audio design, in my opinion. Now that we're here, Waits wants us to head to the labs. Because they can be separated from the main station, all we need to do is, get this, turn on the power. I just can't do it. We get another audio message from Good Guy Ransom, probably before everything went to shit, but after the situation in San Cristobal, Ransom sent some samples to Gemini for testing, which really just adds on to the fact that he's a corporate shill trying to get the most profit out of everything. He's trying to see what exactly he can market that he's trying to sell. In the labs though, the alien was already here waiting for us. I really do love when he gets suspicious too. That's when the hissing starts, and it's hair-raising. Especially if you don't exactly know where he's at or that he's behind you directly. Resetting the power, as we've established, is never a one-step process. We now have to connect the lab control back to Sevastopol so it can be remotely controlled. It's pretty easy, just one hack and some sneaking. Now all we need to do is escape from the labs. About 10 steps from the door, Waits proves to be the exact opposite kind of guy that Ricardo is. He launches the lab away from the station, throwing us into 0G. Until, of course, the lab stabilizes and then we regain our weight, which real people measure in pounds, not kilograms, by the way. There, that's probably my hottest take in this whole video. Our goal is clear by this point. We have to get to the emergency exit. In my head at this point, I'm imagining with the brief 0G, the spinning lab, and the loud and overbearing alarms, the alien needs to be pretty much thrown for a loop. I assume he has to be. Granted, I don't expect this really to change with gameplay, how the alien reacts, but in my head, this is what justified the fact that I really didn't run into him again until I started to pressurize the airlock. He comes to investigate and genuinely looks like a cute little guy, like your cousin when he says, "You got any games on your phone?" type energy. He seems to walk away, but as we enter, it was clear that he was using this area as a trap to bait me. Ripley is, however, a track star, so she's able to get in and shut the door, and we're able to launch ourselves and have a second crash landing into Sevastopol.
Hello? Hello? Can anyone hear me?
Ripley, is that you?
Yes, wait. Me, you son of a bitch. You locked me in. You blew the lab into space.
I had no choice. No choice at all. You saw that thing. You saw what it could do. I had to get it off the station. By any means necessary.
Yeah. Use me as bait. Leave me to die.
And it goddamn worked, Ripley. It goddamn worked. I got that thing. Jettisoned it into the gas giant. The station's safe.
There's that. And there's the fact that you're a heartless bastard. I'm heading back to the Bureau. We can discuss your methods there. Ripley out.
Again, the voice performances here are great. Ripley is almost a human being again, if nothing else brought to life by incredible voice acting. As for Waits, I gotta say, I really can't blame him, not too much. Humanely, yes, he's a piece of shit. But from a logical standpoint, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. I get that. Countless lives lost to this creature, and one more life stands in the way of defeating it. That to me is a no-brainer. Now, we landed back close to where we actually started the game, near where we met the bald beauty Axel, who I'm really sad up to this point we really haven't heard mentioned or found any notes about the kind of guy he was pretty much at all. This time though, when we're moving through the luggage, there's actually a shotgun and a new body, which kind of just indicates that there's been people moving around the station just like we have. But now, with the inclusion of the shotgun, we enter what is a really weird lull for the game. It's not bad, not like the Marlowe section by any means, and it's clear that they want you to think that the alien is gone. You're meant to feel safe, even more bullish in that regard. and it's truly starting to load us up with ammo and a better arsenal. The trip back to the Bureau is an exciting one. There's Sikhs and security guys blocking our way, but as we start to sneak by them, and we're stuck with yada yada yada, another bug hunt. Woo! Ricardo does chime in to let us know that the androids are behaving out of the ordinary and leaving their stations. And we do get an almost immediate payoff for this though, as Sikhs and security gets ambushed by some not so sleepy Joes. Now I thought I was going to kind of J. Cole in this Drake and Kendrick beef of a man versus machine combat, so I was going to kind of stay back and watch and see what happens. But that's not really how it works, so I had to kind of go sicko mode real quick. There, is that enough? Do you think that's enough pop references for this? Yeah? Okay, we're good. Alright, thank you. The shutters to the Marshal's Bureau are locked, but waits can be heard over our radio. Androids have breached their stronghold, and our officer, not so friendly, is dead. If you think about it though, it's almost instant karma. However, I really wish that we would have seen him again, so there could be some kind of dramatic cutscene where Ripley actually gets to rip him a new one. So we gotta find a new way in. This guy goes out with a bang. But our travels actually take us through an animal shelter. The terminal here is all from the crew of the Anesidora. The only gist that you really need is that when everything with Foster happened, the rest of the crew were left stranded on Sevastopol, and they wanted to separate themselves from the drama so they may have a way to actually change their chances of survival. They don't want everyone to hate them. Another nearby terminal has random entries from civilians. The most impactful to me was the audio log from a lady stating that most people believe that Marshal Waits will kill the creature, but many are still needing to defend themselves from humans, as looters and thieves run rampant. And literally one vent later, we're in the Marshal's Bureau. How is that even possible? You'd like to imagine that of all the places, with this being a blockade, it would have been completely locked down. Maybe that's just how some of the people escaped. We'll take it as that. There is one still alive though. Ricardo missed the worst of whatever happened here. Even though Waits is slumped on the ground, along with every other person who sought asylum here, there's still a job to do. Waits sent Samuels to access Apollo in order to deal with the androids, we know that. But even before everything at the Bureau, there's still been no word from Samuels, so we're going to go ahead and go after him. And Ripley even takes a bit of initiative in the decision making here, which is really great. Ricardo isn't keen on staying to be the man in the chair, but Ripley's promise of him looking out for her in exchange for her coming back for him was one that no one would really ever pass up. So now we've got to head to Sikhs and Synthetics, and after a quick little stealth merry-go-round with an android here, we're able to get through to the transit. Ricardo tunes in again to let Ripley know some information, but once again his fear is taking over him a bit. Overall, it just adds a little bit of depth to Ricardo as a character. He's more of a fearful fellow, and while it's not always desirable traits in characters that we see, sometimes it's what really humanizes these words and visuals on a screen to make us care more about them, which is great. Once in Sikhs and Synthetics, fans from the first movie get a terrifying sight. A man, dead in his chair, has seemingly been choked to death. In my opinion, there's no better way to go out. But what's actually concerning is the rolled up paper in his mouth. There's precedent that these androids may be using that paper as a way to plant an embryo into that man as a host to create another xenomorph. Fortunately, there's no chest exit wound, and he already seems to be dead, so it doesn't seem like anything actually came from this one. But still, it's crazy to see stuff like that. Our trip takes us to the elevators, and Amanda has already seemingly forgotten from the beginning of the game how bad she is at the floor is lava. Good thing everything still works out here though. The next vent takes us to the synthetic morgue, or at least that's what it feels like. The low fog gives the feeling that the room is cold, but to me the really chilling feeling is an entire area dedicated to malfunctioning killer robots. I kind of explored the area first and, kind of went a little out of order here. I found the power that I needed to turn on before I even attempted going forward through the main door. However, the second lever did meet me with some android resistance. One terminal nearby talks about that VIP sail tour from way earlier. You'll remember I framed it as Seegson and Sevastopol's last real chance at redemption. Even the Seegson tech guys used blank androids for their tech presentation as to not allow any malfunctions. An audio log from our good friend Ransom shows that he also had some android difficulties as he woke up to one attacking him in his apartment. But again, as I've already mentioned, as we get to the door that we need to progress, we've already done the legwork to turn off the electricity to it. Now, following through this next vent, we hear a friendly voice. It's Samuels. He's not talking to us though, but rather to a working Joe. This window vent here is really reminiscent of the one earlier in the game, where they showed just how ruthless and deadly the working Joes can be in melee combat. Now, we get to see them humbled in the exact same way. Samuels does his own form of decommissioning, and it really just goes to show you just how much Weyland-Yutani won out even in the android tech race, what supposedly was the Seegson specialty. Also, why the hell don't we ever get these vents through gameplay normally? They'd be really nice to see every once in a while. Being able to occasionally spy on whoever's outside the vents through regular gameplay, or in the off chance you look around and look through one of these holes from the outside and you see a xenomorph going through it, that would be really, really scary, and it'd give you a sense of, hey, I need to find somewhere to hide before he gets out of that vent. But anyways, now we're in the executive showroom. There's androids on display pedestals here and a woman dead in a chair by the terminal. The note says her name was Suzanne. She was told to stay in the room because there were reports of malfunctioning androids. Well, as we know, that of course was a terrible idea. Also on this computer, there's a log of all VIP visits. They all read 0 appointments. All of that worrying, scrambling, and mistreatment, all for investors not even to bite. A nightmare scenario for Seegson, but also, once again, very karmic. The note also indicates there's a button nearby to unlock the door. Finding it behind the pillar took me way longer than I'd ever care to admit, but once I did, the unthinkable happened. No way, I never would have guessed. One of the androids aggroed me, and then they all did. It was a very well crafted, creepy moment in my opinion. Too bad for them that I brought the cheat code. Pipe bombs. Now, running from them, I go past a locked door, and there actually is a stash room nearby, where I find plenty of ammo, tools, and even a Molotov cocktail upgraded blueprint. However, that's pretty much it. So now it's really time to face the music. They go down like it's nothing with my pipe bombs, and one of them has the keycard that we need to progress. And once the elevator is powered up, we're headed to android orientation. A cool little note, the music here is almost calming. It's different than the electronic style that we've kind of come across up till this point, almost like as soon as we deal with more and more tech stuff in the game counteracts by going more for a string instrumental. Now this next bit of gameplay is a little different. You get to shimmy on the ledge and avoid the hot steam. And to my knowledge, this is the only point in the game where you really ever have to do something like this. So I look at this stuff as like, yeah, it enhanced the gameplay, but you should have used it a few more times. There's an audio log from Spedding, further elaborating how the android problem came up, that an android reported in with head trauma, but it was covered in human blood. I don't know about you, but the framing of that is written well and quite suspenseful. He also mentioned again that his assistant is locked away safely, and we all know that that doesn't end up to ever be true. R.I.P. Suzanne. Hey, what's going on? Gang, we're bug hunting. Today, it's this random world tile that doesn't adhere to the same laws of lighting as the rest of the game. Really minor, but if anything, it's kind of funny. This next sequence is what I would call pretty good. It features conjoined, identical rooms of androids in beds. You don't give them a reason to wake up, and they won't. You can also sneak around and turn off the cameras, and quite frankly, just don't be too bold. No sprinting or anything like that. Now, there are options for vents underneath too, but that's really for pussies. Hey look, it's Samuels. He's still trying to connect with Apollo, but the problem is, it'll only allow Seeks and synthetics to interact. He's going to use something that looks a lot like an MRI, called a reformat chamber. According to Ripley, it's really dangerous though, and Samuel seemingly knows the risk already. He locks himself in, and starts for us what I can only refer to as a haunted Halloween house walkthrough. Light shows, spooky fog, dark room, and constant loud noises really fit that vibe in my opinion. The only thing missing was the hayride to get there and the creepy guys way past their prime, getting way too close to touch you. Apollo still rejects Samuels, so we are going to have to manually disconnect the systems. But it's got to be in the correct order or it will be fatal to Samuels. He starts listing them in terms of their color cables, and that works fine. But once the emergency lights turn on, everything is now covered in a coat of red. So Samuels has to describe where the cords are going based on what's around them. And he does so by accessing the schematics of the room. And before we move on, I want to say that I love this kind of stuff. I wish you could actually properly fail this section. You know, if you don't do it, then Samuels would just straight up die. Maybe, he accomplishes the goal either way so we can still continue the story. But if we do this correctly, Samuel survives. If we don't, then he dies. I think that would be really cool. In the sequel, I hope there's stuff like that where if you succeed, you save someone, but if you fail, maybe they die. And of course, I would always prefer for that to be optional content and not main story focused, but in this instance I think it could have worked. However here, this isn't even the case. He was able to open up the elevator to the Apollo core, and it will now even talk to her. However, it does come at the unfortunate price that no matter what, Samuels is gonna die. It's quite sad. Ripley never treated Samuels poorly for being an android, but all the same, when she says that he's dying, he takes comfort in her to imply that he even had a life to live in the first place. When asked why, he said he wanted Amanda Ripley to have closure, which full circles his character from the very beginning of the game in the first cutscene as to why he even asked her to come along in the first place. This was, in my opinion, one of those rare moments where I actually would have preferred this to be a cutscene rather than just in first-person view. The conversation here cuts short, but clearly it's due to being unable to see emotions on Amanda's face. It almost makes me wish the game either had no cutscenes and it was all from the first person and fully committed, or that they were there for all major points within the game. On the way back, some androids are already on the prowl and catch me by surprise. They are, however, no match for me. I give them the old college experience and I poke them once and I run away. The lift that we couldn't use earlier that we had to shimmy across that steam is now powered up thankfully, so that's nice. However, Ricardo plays a recording that he found of Taylor interrogating Marlowe. She wants to know, for the sake of the company, what happened and where. He promises all information, a way to get off the station, and I'm sure probably more if she can get him out of that cell. Then things get frantic and the recording ends, but they obviously got out as their bodies weren't there. Another thing I find, an audio log from Spedding details his terrible experience with Apollo customer service. And it kind of seems like more than anything we're following his footsteps down to Apollo to investigate. And now for what can be described as my least favorite section in any horror game. The lose your weapons that you've gotten up till this point segment. And that's no blasting cap. The way they explain it within the game here logically is that in order to get to Apollo, the door to allow us in won't unlock unless we can go through the detectors, but thankfully that doesn't mean we have to get rid of our gadgets and gizmos. Now going in here, the first thing I noticed was it feels weirdly void of humanity. Obviously, I know, but it's insanely sterile. There's no traces of humans at all in some of these sections, whereas in much of the other game there's plenty of trash and some kind of debris or proof of life. In a terminal nearby, I find a sales pitch that talks about how androids act with Apollo as their hive mind, essentially. Which we basically already knew, but how they kind of share consciousness and communicate with one another instantly is going to be a huge part of this next section of the gameplay. Now, after hacking both sides to turn the turbine off and get the vents cooled off, we're able to continue towards the Apollo core. However, we do lose contact with Ricardo. From this point forward, we're in too deep, as it were. And just straight up, this area is tough. Between the lack of firepower and limited resources, there's already a challenge. But the androids here are built different. While they're still the same speed, they don't die with one single pipe bomb like the other ones did. So even my surplus of supplies that I've been building up throughout the game is now considered in high demand. Before anything crazy does happen though, I do find another audio log, and this one is sent to Spedding, talking about a last-minute deal to save Sevastopol. Apparently there really was a buyer after all, and Apollo was sent a new set of operation rule set for programming. Also in this room is where you find the gas mask, which obviously, as I've stated, opens up some stuff earlier in the game too. It's automatic that once you enter a gassy area, Amanda will automatically throw it over your face, and while you are protected, it does further obscure your vision. Now, I immediately get spotted and take the first one down, but I don't have enough ammo to even kill a second one. And they all feel like they're on super high alert at this point. They're wandering from far off to help look for me, and items like EMPs are no longer effective due to the hazard suits that they're wearing. Now, eventually, after a pretty intense chase sequence, things cool off as I hide, which allows me to kind of sneak back to where I already was. This time I do make it to where I need to be, and I turn on the server banks on both sides of this operation, aptly named the left and the right hemisphere to kind of parallel that Apollo is like the brain of the station. So that's really cool. I always love stuff like that. Now we just need to find one of the access vents to get into the Apollo core. I took the right hemisphere back to see if I missed any collectibles, and I found an audio log once again from Spedding. It was his moment of realization that ransom missing, the androids hyper-focusing on hazard containment, and comms being down may all be directly connected, which is the exact answer we're trying to get from Apollo, basically. So it's good that the game kind of reframes it once again right before we get there, which is the exact answer we're trying to get from Apollo 2. Why focus on seemingly the creature only when the whole station will fail if not maintained and kept to order? The way back with these androids proves to be just as exciting as the way to. These guys are way smarter with their detecting than the others in my experience, and they even seem to be flanking me, which realistically was probably just due to enemy pathing, but once again it felt very smart and they felt very connected here in this moment. So I was forced to use my smoke bombs as pretty much my only deterrent, and I kind of felt like a failed ninja here, until it worked. But anyways, I find the vent that I need, and we're now in the Apollo core. And with a moment to breathe, that was one of my favorite sections of the whole game, which I know is mildly contradictory compared to, me talking about losing your weapons, but I hate that as a trope. But I love the fact that it's forcing me to, kind of rely on my wits and a little more of my tools. This is something that I wish the game did a lot earlier as more of a tutorial as well. Now, our access tuner to open up Apollo is way too slow for this program, but all you gotta do is find the right screen in one of the two vents, and then you can actually access Apollo just fine. I appreciate that this was different and we actually got to see the access tuner fail at something, but really there hasn't been a hack I haven't done on my first try yet. But this felt like padding more than anything, like, hey, you can't do that, you gotta go find another terminal before you can hack this terminal. It's like, I guess, but it feels a little drawn out. However, I did instantly forget it due to the symphony of awesomeness as Apollo rises. The machine labors to rise, the music sounds very much like the original movie soundtracks, and the visuals of perfectly symmetrical, well-lit piece of giant technology is just straight up great. Plus, all the wires coming out from it really do give the feeling that this is the brain of the station, so to speak. Walking in has a pre-rendered scene recreating exactly how it looked and felt stepping into the mother computer in the original Alien. And while these systems were meant to be competitors, Apollo and Mother that is, the real reason I think that the systems look so similar is due to the bombshell that drops now. As sophisticated as I made the Apollo system seem, it's really just functioning as a magic 8-ball here. You step in, type your questions or commands, and it answers. Shutting off the androids was a no-go, due to the presence of an unidentified life form. When Ripley says the creature is gone, it's revealed the reactor core has some less than promising scans. Great. But the real bombshell isn't the possible return of the alien, but that Weyland-Yutani, the company both Amanda and her mother had worked for, has already bought Sevastopol, seemingly only a few days after they even sent Amanda and the team to go get the black box. Now, fans of Alien know that Weyland-Yutani is a profit-first, vile corporation that time and again has shown interest in the xenomorph for its uses as a resource by way of biological warfare. And at the end of the day, product for profit. Now, earlier I mentioned that Samuel's linking with Apollo creates a bit of a plot hole. And while we know that Apollo received new programming from its new buyer, and we now know that's Weyland-Yutani, which ostensibly makes it one of their machines now, if I see it correctly. So in my eyes, I see no reason why Samuels wasn't able to more easily interface with the computer. You could argue, hey, he's one of ours, but he's low ranking or something, but ultimately he's an android. He should have to do whatever the hell you program him or command him to do. Regardless though, this is a poignant scene that encapsulates everything that makes Alien as a franchise great. Powerful plot reveals and a strong message that the big corporations don't give a shit about the little guy, and that you are always expendable. And while that social commentary has been played out to the death, the fact that it is still the same corporation fucking over more people just adds to those same reasons that the movies hit so well. I mean, hell, Ridley Scott with the first movie made it so abundantly clear because they never even refer to Weyland-Yutani as its name, they simply call it the company. Yes, it was meant to be slang by the workers or whatever, but it was so you could superimpose while watching that movie that same feeling onto any corporation at the end of the day. But now that all that's done, we are able to go under the Apollo core to head towards reaching the reactor. A note from Ransom to Spedding talks a little bit about the buyout, but he also mentions us, the team picking up the black box. The incident with Foster had already occurred, so they knew that something was wrong on the station. However, they wanted the buyout to go off without a hitch, so ideally Ransom wanted Spedding to make sure the disappearances were kept a secret from Ripley and the crew. Cutting through engineering, I play a game of cat and mouse with an android to get a torch upgrade, essentially opening up most of the other doors within the game at this point. After that is yet another tight environment with a single android that you can kill or stealth around while doing the super engaging task of turning on generators. And while I joke about that, the next bit is truly great. The shutters close and block our way, and trapped with us is one more android, but this time it's one of those super androids. And while I tried to stealth around it, it didn't work out. After accidentally stepping into the scene with picking up the bolt gun, I get another one of those truly organic, tense moments within the game. Throwing in some great environmental world building, and you'll see signs like this that make it even cooler. Reports of employees using tools as weapons, and that's exactly what this makeshift device is. And for once it feels like we have the perfect tool to deal with one of the enemies within the game. Yes, we had guns for people, but that just is what it is. Finally though, we make it to the elevator. Ripley has contacted Ricardo a few times up to this point, but this is really cool. She asks him if he's ever been to the reactor, and he says no. She says she trained on one what feels like a lifetime ago. And really that's nothing major, that bit of dialogue, but those little quips really just kind of ground and remind us that Ripley did live her life as a mechanic before all of this as a survivor. And once again, it makes us feel more comfortable with the fact that she knows how to use a lot of these tools already. Now, as for the newer tools that I've been missing for a little bit now, a few hallways later, we're reunited with most of our firepower, which is really nice. I feel so much better with them than without them. And it's clear why we got them, because as soon as we get into the reactor core, it's crawling with androids. However, I found the bolt gun to actually be more than sufficient, because it's also very satisfying as you take out androids, even the high-powered ones, in a single shot. And thankfully this environment provides a lot of ammunition as well, which is really nice. But adding in that the water being thrown around here kind of simulates a rainstorm, and the rhythmic booms and shocks of voltage really seal the deal that this is one of those top-of-the-scale, high-octane moments that really have that epic factor to them. Now, clearly there's no funny business here, no aliens, so I go ahead and take the elevator down further. And man, I couldn't stop laughing while buying things because goddamn, there's some funny business. We get our flamethrower back here to complete our arsenal for the rest of the game. But for the first time in the game, we get to experience the nest, or the hive, however you want to refer to it. And man, I gotta say, this is super creepy. The gross, mucinous looking walls and eggs that litter the floor all contrast heavily to the environments we're used to. So already, my eyes are playing a little bit of tricks on me every time the light flashes. I think something's moving. Our goal is to destroy the nest by overloading both the alpha and beta cores, essentially turning on the power, but on steroids this time. The light blue flashing lights only further remind me of the end of Aliens as we towed our own flame units. Plenty of loot by way of the bodies along the walls are kind of bittersweet because you realize how many people were still on the station that was considered skeleton crew. Even now I find new things to appreciate, like the quality of the static reflections in the water puddles on the floor. But as we reach our objective, we get our first new enemy since damn near the first third of the game, the Facehugger. You know him, you love him. The Facehugger will leave an opening egg to try and latch on and kill you. Well, not right away realistically, but for the sake of gameplay, yes. Thankfully, they are easily dispatched with a flame unit. And once the first core is overloaded, you actually get quite the spectacle. An epileptic's worst nightmare is really cool, but as the core heats up, the screams of many angry xenomorphs in unison seems to make me public enemy number one. And I've got to say, having that many killing machines angry at me specifically is such a terrifying thought. If anything, it further draws comparisons to that of a beehive, as once you piss off one of them, you've pissed off all of them. And the motion tracker being sporadic as hell is even more disorienting in this moment. You don't know where to look, where the xenomorph might come from, but I got a strong feeling that from here on, they'd be looking for me. And just like that, on our way towards the second core, we have to deal with just one big alien. Which, honestly, I expected to be more in this part of the game, but hey, that's okay, it's fine. The one that we do get is really aggressive, relatively smart, and quite frankly, much more menacing when it feels like it's in its own natural environments. It feels comfortable in its home. It almost feels like it's defending it from me this time. And sure, a lot of that is from the part of the plot, the story is kind of making me feel that way, but the gameplay helps that feeling along as well. And after pushing along some pretty tight corridors, juggling that big warrior and the facehuggers that come out of random eggs here and there, we finally got both cores powered up. So I make the quickest dash back to the elevator that I can possibly do, and heading back up sees relief from that kind of nest visuals that we've seen now. But more androids berate us as Ripley hacks some capacitors on the reactor towers to basically open it up to increase the damage that the purge will cause on the nest. This part to me is super boring. It's really drawn out. You have to go around and do each of these terminals, all while being attacked by androids. The fighting is fine, but again, when you only really need to use one type of weapon, you're not forced to juggle anything in these scenarios. I just felt like it was just too much. It felt a bit like a shooting gallery when much of the game has been engaging me on a deeper level. So it's fine, there's probably a place for it as far as gameplay variety and pacing goes, but it just really wasn't my thing. Regardless though, with all hacks done and all androids dead, we need to head up to the central terminal to activate the purge. With 2 button presses is easily one of the coolest spectacles in the whole game. Electricity pulses down faster and faster while the water slowly rises. As a huge fan of sci-fi and technology like this, it's just really cool to see these kind of reactions within the world that we're fully immersed in. What's not so cool is that we can actually see the alien again. He's on the same rails that we just fought on. And boom. So simple as an Alien fan, but so poignant for Ripley, who still doesn't truly know the rules of this killer species. That's confirmation that there are more than one of these warrior aliens. And this is also, I'm pretty sure, the closest she's ever physically been to one, even though she is separated by glass this time as opposed to San Cristobal. So to top it all off, the purge didn't kill them, and they seem to actually be migrating away from the nest. The implication that they'll be all over the station now is generally horrifying if you've never seen what happens next. But it's not all without hope. Ricardo chimes back in and he says that he sees the purge may have been good for Sevastopol's systems too. The old turn it off and turn it back on switch actually worked with lights, transit systems, and even communications. So he's headed to comms and he asked us to go to medical. Unfortunately, as we get closer, Apollo regains control before Ricardo can make communication off of Sevastopol. But he saw that the Anesidora is back nearby the station as opposed to orbiting around the gas giant. Marlowe must have called the ship back to escape with Taylor. And that's why we need to get to medical, to get to the shuttles in the ambulance bay as a means to actually board the Anesidora, which is only close, not docked on the station. Now on the way, I run into the Xenomorph again, and while the location is one that I've actually dealt with him before in San Cristobal, this time I'm at a bit of an advantage, whereas this time I've actually got the flame unit, but when it rains it pours. So this android here, he's gotta go, so I decide to exercise him in this doorway. Now, I want to say, I was doing a little backtracking, though, to pick up some collectibles from earlier in the game when I was just a small fry, and the alien actually caught me with my pants down a little bit. It's still pretty stress-inducing given how long I've been dealing with this guy, and to that I have to give the game props. Anyways, I finally go back to the med bay and find a level 3 upgrade for my scanner and a flashbang upgrade. And with this upgrade, before I actually continued on with the main story, I did a little more backtracking and found myself in the room that Coleman locked himself in earlier in the game. A message from Marshal Waits to Dr. Morley tells him to prep his patients for the decommission. But that's not the cool find in this room in my opinion. The attention to detail here is really nice. The broken vent that the alien came through in Coleman's last moments is here, And there's also small things like, food storage and the mattress that Coleman was using to sleep on. Oh well, he's gone now. R.I.P. Bozo. Still a pretty cool find though. Back to the main objective, we hack into the ambulance and we're off. This ship texture, or whatever it is, doesn't look bad in motion, but in retrospect, those first few seconds really do show low fidelity that you don't see very often in this game. And while that's technically a negative, it's a testament to the quality of this easy 10+ hour experience. We're now on the Anesidora, and after a quick loading scene, which I really wish could have been played out of us actually flying there and seeing the Sevastopol more in all of its glory, but more of the time, budget, whatever you want to say, I understand, and I don't really blame that at all. However, we're on the Anesidora now, and we're out of range of comms once again. This is a classic but niche sci-fi survival horror trope where you leave the initial sprawling space station to explore a smaller vessel that also happens to be the origin of whatever caused the downfall of the greater vessel's destruction. I'm looking at you, Dead Space. Now this section is pretty linear, you're just going down some hallways, some rooms, finding a few items, but the ship is super eerie. All the lights are off, and everything's powered down in such a way that you really are just looking around for any form of life. Knowing there could be friend or foe around any corner really does a lot for this as well. After a few hallways, I find an audio log. I believe this is from Foster, about how they finally had a lucky break on a salvage finding the black box of the Nostromo. The reward from Weyland-Yutani would be helpful as the ship, the Anesidora, is a lot worse for wear. And another note nearby actually further expands on this a little bit, stating that if they do any more space jumps, the engines probably aren't going to last, leaving them essentially in deep space if they ever try to go again. However, the note also says that fixing this will be very costly. So it was Marlowe's idea to track the path of the black box and find the Nostromo wreckage themselves. Only, instead they found the distress beacon that we know was ultimately to this crew and everyone else's doom. Another audio log, I think from Heist, and if I had to say a criticism about this game is sometimes it's not always super clear who's leaving the messages. You'll get some that's like, waits out, or, with a little hyphen, ransom or something at the end, but a lot of times you just have to kind of clue yourself into who's been leaving notes around the area already, who's the main character that we're reading about. But sometimes it's flashing back and forth between these characters, you really just don't know. But regardless, Heist talks about how Marlowe plans to cover up his wife's, let's say, condition. And even then the crew seemingly disagreed about breaking quarantine procedures, even talking about how fights have broken out. It's clear now to me that whether it's Ransom covering up the disappearances on Sevastopol, or Marlowe lying about his wife's need for quarantine, or even the marshals being cagey about what happened in San Cristobal, that a lot of this story actually hinges on selfishness and deceit. Obviously, you can take it a lot deeper with Seegson, Sevastopol, Weyland-Yutani, but that's been done before and pretty drawn out. But truly, each character, each major player in this story is scummy and self-serving in their own unique ways. Whether it be for greed, order, or for love, they're all doing it for different reasons, but they're all doing the same thing. They're basically saying, hey, double it and pass it on to the next person. They're screwing everyone else down the line because of their mistakes. After booting up the power on the Anesidora, Marlowe begins to talk to us over the comms. Says that we could join his crew because there are a few spots available. Pretty funny, all things considering. I mean, he's got some personality to him, if nothing else. Something that a lot of the characters in this game tend to not really have as much. Taylor also chimes in here to let us know that Marlowe still is in fact a piece of shit who double-crosses people. Also in the same room there's a facehugger, which really doesn't make sense to me at all why it's here. I'm still not really sure about that. Assuming there was no chest bursting or any funny business before getting to Sevastopol, I'm really at a loss as to why it's here at all. Ultimately though, Marlowe has the right idea, that the xenomorph is an unwinnable fight. Once it makes contact, it wins and it will spread. So therefore the plan is to wipe out any evidence so the company can't find it. Now already the implication is, Taylor knows something about it. That's not a good sign. But once we get to the power core, we have a pretty big moment. The flight log of the Nostromo, wiped from the box by Marlowe not to raise any suspicions about why they actually went to Sevastopol. However, the part that we're seeing is actually a message from Ellen Ripley. Amanda's mother, the main character of the series, or at least the original series, left in the hope of Amanda one day hearing it right before the end of the first movie. She says that they found an alien creature that was very dangerous, so they had to destroy the ship so that it would never be able to find its way to their home. Which, all in all, this message ends with the simple fact that Ellen Ripley survived with this encounter, and of course for Amanda, more importantly probably, was the I love you that she got at the end, which would probably be pretty amazing. I think Ripley's been missing for 15 years at this point. To hear that after so long, as an adult at this point, was probably very tragic. This is a great reveal. One that would have been further enhanced by seeing the realization hitting Amanda's face, as this is all in first person, ultimately that she and her mother had truly dealt with the same evil force. This is a good moment for Ripley. I just wish that for the simple sake of her character throughout the course of this game, that the idea that any of this message or recording would have survived and was still known about still existed, which would have given her a reason to continue on and not just turn tail first chance she got, and essentially do anything outside of survival, which it's not bad. I just think that they could have done it slightly better, in my humble opinion. However, one thing I do believe truly was handled poorly, by hardly being handled at all, was Taylor herself. Hurt for most of the game, now she's just a hostage. Well, really, we all are. Marlowe doesn't want to escape on the Anesidora, he wants to use it to blow up Sevastopol as well. Which, as someone who wants to survive very clearly, that's a bit too much of playing God for me. Well, and for Taylor. It's too late though, as the toaster oven starts heating up. Ripley tries her best to walk Taylor through the process of turning it off, but in the end, it's all in vain. Taylor is thrown against the wall, and if she's not dead yet, she will be soon. And while I wish I could care, I don't. Unlike Samuels, who cared about Amanda's mission to find her mother, or Ricardo, who saved us from the xenomorph, Taylor has done nothing up until this point to earn the adoration that the other characters even slightly exhibit. And that's both from Ripley and from me as the player of the game. I cared more about Waits dying solely because he talked more within the game. We had more interactions with him. Which is truly a letdown for me because the wasted opportunity of a small fry legal from Weyland-Yutani with a big heart, really there was an archetype right there, and it was like right on the precipice. We just needed to get a little more out of Taylor's character. But we just didn't have time with her. I'm not saying that's not what she was or intended to be, but it didn't really come across that way within the game. So ultimately, looking back on it, as someone that we spent entire sections of the game trying to save her life, she really just was a plot device in most scenarios within this game, which, again, in retrospect, after playing most of this game, I don't know, it disappoints me because there was that perfect story juxtaposition right there. Now this next sequence is great. It's just running back the same trip that we just took, but everything's exploding and shaking, and it's absolutely bonkers. I love when shit falls apart in this game, and I hate that this was one of the few running sequences within the game. Most of the time you're stealthing around and trying not to be detected, but I love those moments when the game just asks you to go absolutely balls to the wall and navigate something insane. A scripted chase sequence here or there throughout the actual game, maybe where xenomorphs were running out of the walls or something and we had to just keep running, would have been absolutely amazing. Now, as we make it back onto Sevastopol, Verlaine is able to reach out from comms. Once again, this is one way. The explosion of the Anesidora means the orbital stabilizer is down, meaning the station will go into the planet's atmosphere eventually. She wants to help and take survivors, but she can't dock as of now. So we need to contact the Torrens, but as we get to comms, there's some bad guys. They heard the same call that we did, and they want to take the Torrens by force, which to me just means that they can taste the force of my pipe bombs. Running into Ricardo, he reveals that if we find the observatory, we can get the Torrens' exact coordinates and point the comms relay directly at it, bypassing Apollo. Sounds like a good idea to me, but actually doing so is pretty boring, but the visuals are cool nonetheless. Regardless, we got our coordinates, and now we get to head outside. Going to the airlock, we get a new spacesuit. And man, the reflections on these things are pretty cool, huh? I could make jokes or references to, RTX on. I would love to see Amanda's face here. And that would be pretty cool. Very Metroid Prime, when the screen lights up and you see Samus's face. I think stuff like that could have been really cool within the game, but not really necessary by any means, and it would have been a bit on the nose with the inspirations. But okay, now, just like the last, space walk sequence, this one's pretty bland. Thankfully, this time you have a lot more visually to take in, and it isn't as long. The lens flare on the sun and particles blowing through the space around Ripley are really nice flares, but I can't pretend I didn't hurry through this section as quickly as possible, just like the last one. Now, once we get it set up, Ripley is actually able to talk to Verlaine, and she kind of catches her up. Hey, there's an alien creature on board, very deadly, yada yada yada. Requesting urgent extraction. However, we don't even really learn anything new here. Yes, we've caught the Torrens up, but essentially the Torrens still can't dock, and we need to extend the platform as much as possible to even attempt to do so. So, we have to head back inside. The welcoming party is a brutal one. A xenomorph forces its way into the main room with humans in it. It's pretty fun to watch, honestly, all things considered, but I've got a job to do. Sneaking around as the creature looks for any humans is as fun as it's ever been throughout the course of the game. But now it's pretty easy to trace our way back through comms. The alien, as for this part of the game, pretty much onward, is ever present. We see him in this vent here, which was almost what I suggested earlier, but more as a regular gameplay mechanic. However, this being one time that we see it is just as impactful as an oh shit moment, especially considering the fact that we were in this vent once before. And there he is. Ricardo, our main squeeze, is gone. And as much as I'd like to take the time to mourn or whatever, say a eulogy, there's really no time as we're actively being hunted. We gotta keep moving. Although I gotta say, I really like the guy. I think if there was ever a character to potentially bring into the sequel, I think that'd be really great to be him. The side passages we opened up make it fairly easy to avoid the alien for the most part. It does get a little sketchy though, I can't lie. Because that tension of not knowing whether you're being seen or not is genuinely half of the fear factor. Which, in my opinion, really adds to that original design. The original H.R. Geiger design, or Geiger counter, Geiger, where the alien just doesn't have a readable face. There's no eyes or any emotion of any kind, which makes it all the more terrifying. Because when in this game, when you're caught, it means instant death. There's no true facing him. And that goes the same with the next room. He clearly believes that I'm here for one reason or the other, but eventually he does move on because I give him no reason to believe I'm still there. I did, however, find an audio log here from Sinclair to some of the guys that I think that we just killed. He shut off the transit to their sanctuary, so nothing or anyone else would be able to get in. You kind of left me, so you can't really come back in kind of mentality to the max on that one, which I can respect in a survival scenario. After a little bit of button pressing, the transit is up and running again. This next section really shows the decay of the station in my opinion. Junk and debris roll back and forth as the station fails to maintain its balance. Also, emergency and evacuation voice warnings are playing constantly now on a loop, so the urgency of everything just feels heightened, especially when the hisses of the xenomorph are the only thing piercing these alarms. Our goal is to get to the spaceflight terminal to extend the dock, but in order to open the way, this next section has us doing a little bit of back and forth with one of the aliens in what I'd like to call a good balance of challenging and tense stealth. A lot of the layouts of gameplay sections in Alien Isolation are good, but sometimes they hit the legendary status, and this to me is one of those moments. A bunch of rooms strung together with one through-line hallway that's for the most part inaccessible with multiple windows that can alert the Xeno at pretty much all times. And while there's really not too much else to say, it's a unique looking environment, it looks pretty good. At the end of the day, it's just more of the Xenomorph gameplay and stealth that you know and love, and the challenge comes from the fact that you have to go back and forth, potentially expending your ammo as you do it. Headed onward, the music picks up on the way out though, and it's quite lovely. I recently bought the vinyl for the 10th anniversary right before they announced the sequel game, by the way, and while not all of the songs from the soundtrack are on it, unfortunately, I really hope that this one is. Headed onward, we loop into some familiar territory from the beginning of the game, but there's still no dig dug, so we move on to the tow platform. We're almost there now by this point. To get everything into position, we need to look around and find 2 points to hack. Then we can access a terminal to engage the docking clamps. The personnel dock is knocked out, But Ripley wants to live, so she's going to go ahead and put a suit on and use the maintenance rig to get to the Torrents. Things absolutely have to be complicated though, so I get this scare and I absolutely shit myself. But also, this is my introduction to the double xenomorph action. Something that I feel like could have been leveraged a bunch more throughout the course of this game, and something I do hope they include in the sequel. While this is nothing in this small section a seasoned survivor like me can't handle, I can get to it rather quickly. But in the idea of a sequel, I would hope for maybe a kind of flanking maneuver even. One xenomorph keeps me distracted. Clearly another one in the area would know of my presence by that point too, and they could almost try to outmaneuver me one way or another, leaving me to almost have to use stealth to get around them, and even with a flamethrower, while you can hold them back a little bit, you won't be able to hold them back forever. Anyways, Ripley stops to enjoy those reflections on the spacesuit once again, but this time we get a visual representation of the POV of a toddler when the neighbor's pit bull named Princess gets out. A fade to black later, and we're in a nightmare scenario. Cocooned against a wall of excretion, or whatever you'd really say here, but thankfully no eggs in the area seem to be earmarked for Ripley or have opened for her. Now, Amanda has been putting in the absolute work this whole game, and it starts to show. She tears out of her prison in seconds. Thankfully, these alien killing machines are idiots, and they didn't confiscate my weapons before putting me in jail. So, any facehugger that comes my way gets hit with a nice little flame belch. And I gotta say, this is one of the more satisfying, hey, I'm actually killing something, aspects of dealing with the xenomorph in this game. Now, I know we saw the nest before, but the number of eggs really does make it clear that there is a queen on the station. And while I'm sad that we never got to see that, the existence of the queen in one form or the other, I would love to see at least teasing or some interaction in the sequel. Again, we're starting to build up quite the wish list for what you'd like to see in the sequel. And while I don't want it to completely follow Aliens, there is a pure blueprint there of how characters begin to understand and interact with this species once they've become familiar, which is I think what Amanda will do, just like her mother. Anyways, we're in the transit system now, but not on the inside, of course. As cars randomly flow by, we've got to try and keep our heads down and off the track as much as possible. This is a cool little bit of gameplay. It's pretty much on rails though. I'm pretty sure they're triggered to go by as soon as you're doing it for the most part. Once through, we enter the vents with some facehuggers, but that's just par for the course at this point. Getting through has us back in familiar, albeit ablaze, territory. It's pretty much a straight shot back to the spacesuit at this point, and while this was a nice little excursion, we're now back to the airlock and headed back outside. Debris is flying everywhere as we take a lift across the maintenance arm. We need to uncouple the locks to let the Torrens escape the dock. I'm pretty sure you can't realistically fail here, but the alien makes itself known, slowly as it seems almost cautious as it approaches you, because you look a little different in the spacesuit, and it might not know exactly what you're doing. Just like the first movie though, you gotta kind of pull out all of these canisters, push some buttons, and at the last second, we are out. I think this could have been a bit more dramatic, but the tension here was killer for me personally. For a last second escape at that to me is perfect. Because it couldn't have been more than a few seconds later that Sevastopol plummets into the gas giant. Which it's kind of sad, there's probably more people alive on Sevastopol at that point, but unfortunately they weren't cool like us, and they couldn't have saved themselves. But we're back on the Torrents, and while Ripley tries to make out calls, no one is answering. Which I gotta say, at this point in the game, I would be thinking to myself, if anything came up to me, I would probably just kill myself. And I'm not even being sarcastic or joking, that's just what I would do. And that's just the mentality I began to take. But familiar rooms that are recognizable from the beginning of the game kind of lull you into a bit of a comfort. There's no visible damage, it feels safer. And that's just when another alien shows up. Not unexpectedly though by this point. I know this is a horror game, but how many fake outs are we really going to have? I mean, there was the first one with there being more aliens after we eject the first one, the first escape, where we get taken down into the nest, and now this. That's almost like 3 strikes in my opinion, and even more if you consider how many times we almost got away. Really though, this is, as always, a good bit of tension. It actually is kind of like a QuickTime event in a way. You're having to hold back the movement keys or, controller, I'm sure, to move slowly away from the alien in what is a prolonged existence of being in close proximity to the xenomorph. Something you don't really get throughout the course of the game. definitely not dynamically. So in that way, it's really cool. The xenomorph slowly creeps toward us, almost as if it's an intimidation tactic. I do wish there could have been something less scripted than this, but ultimately it does such a good job of showing, how a creature like this might react in a unique scenario where it doesn't know how strong we are, because I do look different, as I've already mentioned, but it's also very clearly trying to intimidate and therefore kill me. And as poetic as it is, both Amanda and her mother escape the creature in the same exact way, expelling the airlock. Only this time, Ripley goes too. Good thing we still had that suit on, we never had a chance to take it off. And that's it. That's the game. Pretty much the whole thing. We've covered it in just over or just under 2 hours by the time this is done being edited. Ripley floats out, and clearly someone with some lights pulls up, but that's the end of the game. And while there's DLC that I could cover, a probably not canon mobile-only sequel that I played while my fiancé was in labor 3 years ago, and even a full-blown sequel on the way, it's this base experience that I really wanted to focus on in this video. And now that it's all said and done, is it a good game? Yes. Is it a good addition to Alien? One of the best. But does it have flaws? Absolutely. Alien Isolation is a love letter to both Alien and the survival horror genre. Painstaking attention to detail to fit into the already established world and not only expand, but enhance the story we already have is nothing short of a miracle, especially when it comes to messing with things that people love. To step into the shoes of Amanda Ripley, daughter of one of the most iconic characters of all time, was both a safe choice, but also quite inventive. We know from the director's cut of Aliens that Amanda dies later in life, and not by any alien or anything like that. And in that movie, it was a sigh of relief from Ripley that her daughter never had to deal with any of these creatures. And that's kind of a sad and tragic twist, the fact that her daughter went through the same exact things that she's went through, all within her own lifetime. However, the more I focus on, that aspect of Amanda dying of natural causes, I could almost see that being a Weyland-Yutani cover-up and could be a point of interest for the sequel game. Now, for many, the game's runtime, much like this video, is its biggest downside, with some opinions that it goes on too long, and while I generally agree, it's less about the actual gameplay length as much of the pacing of the narrative and creative gameplay encounters, as I have tried to properly highlight throughout the course of this video. However, my problem with Alien Isolation, as I look back upon it with fresh eyes, actually comes down to the characters. There are some good characters, Samuels and Ricardo come to mind for this, and even some that serve their roles without setting the world on fire, like Marshall Waits or Marlowe. There's even Ransom, the high-level guy whose decision-making actively screwed so many people over, and Ripley never even meets or even talks to him within the course of the game. This was fine for me overall, but I wish they would have revealed his fate fully. While presumed dead, I would love to hear if he did happen to make it off the station somehow, or the satisfaction of knowing just how grisly and gnarly his death actually was. Now, on the inverse of that, you have Taylor, a glorified plot device with next to no character development, whose potential as a character archetype sounds better on paper than what we actually got. And I won't completely go over why I think that was important, because I already did earlier in the video. But for me, the biggest disappointment wasn't any supporting character, but Ripley herself. This is probably a hot take, but this playthrough had made me realize that Amanda has a bit of a downward spiral in agency by the time the black box is revealed to have been wiped earlier in the game. Yes, there's more to the story than that, but she becomes more of a yes man for a lot of the game from there on. And that redundancy in the story, compounding with the fact that 75% of the game's objectives are simply switching on the power, it's no wonder why most people felt that the game overstayed its welcome. Flawed as it is, Isolation is still one of my favorite games for a reason. The xenomorph is near perfect. The design lends itself well to that of the original, long and lanky, but stocky enough to be intimidating. It's just a clean design overall. Every animation, from the myriad of frantic walk cycles to crawling through vents, or even one of the many kill cams, adds so much character to the perfect killing machine. The Working Joes were also a wonderful companion piece to the xenomorph. The sheer numbers, tanky nature, and lifeless eyes sealed the deal for the androids becoming an iconic addition to the franchise. Unlike other synthetics within the movies, these androids, while humanoid, don't resemble humans much at all, with white rubber skin and mildly robotic voices. And that didn't even stop there, as they also show up in Aliens Fireteam Elite as kind of a cameo. It's been 10 years since the game first launched. You can play it pretty much anywhere, including on the go with the Switch and even on your cell phone. I'm dead serious, I actually downloaded the free demo on my phone just to see how it ran, and it's okay, other than the fact that it's touchscreen, and I'm sure if you actually had like a controller for your phone, it would be comparable to that Xbox 360 or maybe even Xbox One version of the game. But genuinely, it feels that with each passing year, I only see more and more love for this game. And that's for good reason, I really do mean that, but I felt the need to make a video fully expounding all of my thoughts on the topic. The perfect blending of Metroidvania, looping, and backtracking, and slow and methodical stealth and exploration come together perfectly to make Sevastopol feel like the game's best character, just like the Spencer Mansion from Resident Evil or the Ishimura from Dead Space. That, along with Paul Rudd levels of aging visuals, allows for immersion to the highest degree, which in turn sets every scare within the game up for success. At the end of the day, whether it's a jump scare or some organic gameplay spook, Alien Isolation absolutely crushes its duty as a horror game. And while I will be making more videos about Alien in the fairly near future, more so a wish list video about what I would want to see in the sequel, and maybe even, quote unquote pitching a sequel, that is absolutely it for me today in this very long-winded video. I hope you enjoyed it. It was really fun to sit down and make it, although it took way longer than I ever wanted it to. I'll be honest with you, by the time I'm finishing this, it's way too late. I've missed the 10th anniversary. I think even in the beginning of this video when I first recorded, I even said I thought I'd only miss it by a little bit. It's going to be damn near a month later. But regardless, this has been Falling Hurts, signing off.
One of them told me you called Marshal Waits about a, shall we say, interesting find. I want in. No arguments. After all, how much does Waits really know about it? Not as much as your old friend here. And I bet he wouldn't be understanding about Black Market 55. I look forward to your call, Doc.